Red, purple, blue, green, yellow, white. Yeah, I'm not surprised nobody got this reference. I promise the hint for next week will be easier. Welcome everyone to the next season of Ancient DOS Games. I figured the best way to kick things off would be with one of my favorite DOS games of all time, Descent 2, the sequel to the original Descent, which I covered way back in episode 7. Descent 2 is a much bigger and far more polished game than the original Descent. Which isn't to say the original sucked or anything, because let's face it, being able to move and turn in absolutely any direction in a three-dimensional texture-mapped world was a really innovative thing for the time. But the original game was also incredibly difficult and suffered some balancing issues as well, with some enemies being a joke and some being way too dangerous for how early they showed up. Descent 2, on the other hand, is actually more difficult than the original Descent, if you can believe that. However, the difficulty now is rooted in the level design, and for the most part, everything's been balanced out properly. So when you die now, it's more so your own fault, either going into a situation without understanding what you're up against, or falling for a trap, which the levels are littered with, so you better get used to dealing with them. To put it simply though, Descent 2 seems very much like a game designed specifically for fans of the original, in that if you love the original Descent, you'll love Descent 2 even more. But if you hated the original Descent, you'll probably hate Descent 2 even more. It's just that kind of game. Descent 2 was developed by Parallax Software and published by Interplay in 1996. It's a 3D first-person shooter, supporting both single-player as well as multiplayer gameplay, allowing for up to 8 players to play against each other or through the main game cooperatively. In terms of graphics, the game supports a wide array of 256-color VGA and SVGA video modes, from as low as 320 by 200 resolution, all the way up to 1280 by 1024, though you need to use a special command line parameter to access anything over 800 by 600. All that said, the optimal resolution is 640 by 480, as most of the other resolutions lack support for showing the cockpit and the text doesn't scale any larger. The game supports multiple sound and music cards, so just pick whichever one sounds the best on your system, typically Sound Blaster support. As for its current release date, it's still commercial, but getting a copy is a piece of cake. Just head on over to the Good Old Games website at www.gog.com and you can get both Descent and Descent 2 together for $10. If you want a fully boxed copy with the manuals and everything, like this one, and yeah, it's a freaking huge box, then you can expect to pay more like $20 or $30. Or if you just want the CD on its own, you can expect to pay less than $10, but then you have to factor in shipping too. But yeah, lots of options for getting this game nowadays. The story for Descent 2 is a direct sequel to the events of the first Descent game, where you play the role of the Material Defender, a mercenary hired by the Post-Terran Minerals Corporation, also known as the PTMC. Your job was to go around to various planets in the solar system to decimate various PTMC mines that had become infected with a strange virus, which was causing all the robots in those mines to become aggressive, vicious, and otherwise just plain deadly. Following all of this, your contact with the PTMC tells you that the risk of your ship carrying the virus back with you is too great. So instead, they exercise a little legal jargon in your contract, have you dock with an asteroid station to have an experimental warp core fitted to your ship, then force you to fly out to various other solar systems to take out even more mines that have been showing similar problems. It should be noted that Descent 2 has a much more cinematic feel to it than many games of the time, and features some rather impressive pre-rendered sequences. And the ending, the ending for Descent 2 made players just that much more impatient for a Descent 3, so I'm not going to be spoiling it or anything. In fact, if you have plans to get Descent 3, you should probably play through Descent 2 first, since the start of Descent 3 directly follows the events of Descent 2. Granted, Descent 3 isn't a DOS game, so it's not going to be appearing on the show anytime soon. At least, not as a regular episode. Descent 2 plays almost identically to the first Descent game, in that you float in the air and have complete freedom of movement, being able to move along any axis, and being able to turn along any axis. This can make the controls a little cumbersome, so playing the game with a good joystick is highly recommended, though some people swear by mouse control instead. Mouse control will give you better accuracy for sure, but joystick control will give you better evasion against enemy attacks, so really, it's just a matter of preference. Descent 2 was actually intended to be an expansion pack to the original Descent called Counter-Strike, which is why the game engine and all of its elements are as similar as they are. But truly, there's a lot of differences between this game and the first. For starters, we have the Guidebot. And the Guidebot is basically a robotic buddy that helps you out by scanning the mines and leading you to various locations, such as where to find keycards, hostages, etc. The Guidebot is typically hidden beyond a cage near the start of every level, and it's up to you whether or not you blast the cage open to get access to the Guidebot or not. The Guidebot is simply there to help you out, if you want that help, since, let's face it, the levels in the Descent games can get really big and really confusing, and for some people, navigating them manually is just what they like to do. There's also been a few accessory items added to help you out. Specifically, an energy to shields converter, which lets you transfer your energy levels to your shield levels, but not vice versa. A headlight to help brighten everything up, especially now that the lighting engine is more dynamic than it was in the first game. And an afterburner, which gives you a boost of forward speed to help you out in various situations. The level designs themselves also take advantage of some new elements, notably switches. These devices can be seen on certain walls, and shooting them will either make certain other walls disappear, turn force fields off, unlock doors so you can get through them, but occasionally they're also used to temporarily open a door into a secret area, which you then have to race into before it closes because you won't get a second chance. Well, unless you save ahead of time and then reload your game if you fail, these particular secrets, they're far more easily accessed in multiplayer than in single player, for obvious reasons. The original Descent was notable for having a rather impressive variety of 10 weapons split into two categories: primary weapons that you would typically run off of your energy levels or large stocks of ammunition, and secondary weapons, which were basically missiles and mines that could do a lot of damage. Descent 2 has 20 different weapons you can acquire, and yes, you can have all of these weapons all at the same time. While all of the new weapons are unique in their own right, I'm not going to go into detail about them, otherwise we'd be here forever. Instead, I'm just going to give some basic information about the new weapons and presume you all know about the original 10 weapons from the first Descent game. The new primary weapons include super lasers, which are upgrades to the original lasers to make them even more powerful. The Gauss cannon, which is a much more powerful version of the Vulcan cannon, but causes miniature explosions so you can't safely use it at close range. The Helix cannon, which is an extremely powerful upgrade over the spread fire cannon, but burns through a huge amount of energy too. The Phoenix cannon, which is basically just a plasma cannon with shots that can bounce off of the walls, making it good for hitting enemies around corners or such. And the Omega cannon, which shoots out lightning and is basically instant death for any target that you can get close to. But because of its range limit, it's useless when you're out in the open. The new secondary weapons include flash missiles, which just momentarily confuse targets or brighten the screens of opponents in multiplayer modes, so they're not very useful. Guided missiles, which are extremely useful since you can use your new missile camera to manually guide these missiles exactly where you want them to go. Then you can just press the fire button again to turn them into homing missiles. Smart mines, which are basically a combination of smart missiles with proximity bombs and are thus extremely useful for dealing with targets that are chasing you. Mercury missiles, which are lightning fast and do a lot of damage. And finally, Earthshaker missiles, which are basically what you get when you cross a smart missile with a mega missile. Getting hit by one of these is not recommended. I do have one big complaint though with the way the weapons are balanced, specifically the fusion cannon. Now in the first Descent game, the fusion cannon was the most powerful weapon you could obtain, and as it not only did tremendous amounts of damage, but passed straight through targets as if they weren't even there. The problem is that the fusion cannon was dumbed down to help balance it for multiplayer, and in the process it's now virtually useless in the single player mode, which is rather disappointing considering it was my favorite primary weapon in the first game. Well, the Helix Cannon rapidly became my new favorite for Descent 2. Granted, it didn't make the cut for Descent 3, as did several other weapons, but I digress. The enemies in this game are entirely different from the first Descent game, despite the appearance of the lifter enemy on the box art. But they all have the same basic designs and principles going on, and all of them have their own unique array of weapons to fight you with. Plus, now instead of having just 2 bosses, there's 6 of them, and you fight one at the end of every 4th level. Also, some of the enemies have some more unique designs about them too, such as this one particular enemy that drains your energy levels on contact as opposed to your shield levels. One of the main differences though is the AI, which is actually incredibly well designed. Enemies react in various ways depending on how you're playing the game and can do some highly intelligent things, such as goading you into traps, dodging your attacks, escaping when damaged, even running off to fetch other robots that don't know you're there yet and bringing them back with them to help shoot you down. Like the Guidebot, the enemies are also extremely aware of the layout of the levels, meaning that escaping from one can be rather difficult. Thankfully, most enemies don't like to shoot doors open, so you can use doors as a means of getting away from a firefight. The one new enemy though that's highly unique and also highly annoying is the Thief Bot. Now, every level has a single Thief Bot roaming around. When you reach a certain spot, or sometimes right from the get-go, the Thief Bot will activate and will start attempting to ram into you when you're not looking, stealing one of your components when it does, and running off with it. Thankfully, for as smart as the Thief Bot is, it's a bit too greedy for its own good, and doesn't always pay attention to where it's going. Thus, it's easy to trick the Thief Bot into running into a blockade of proximity bombs or smart mines, or if you manage to trap it into a room, just guard the door well and it shouldn't be able to get past you. These things are hard to destroy, but when you do, they're worth a lot of energy, a lot of shields, and so long as they haven't stolen too many items, you'll get all of them back. I should also note that the enemy spawners are still present, but just as predictable as they were in the first Descent game, so dealing with them isn't too big a deal, just so long as you do deal with them. Descent 2 is one of the most optimized games I've ever seen and has some intense gameplay, especially when combined with its CD audio music tracks, which is actually why the game sometimes pauses momentarily, because it's switching to another music track. True, patching up to version 1.2 removes this pause, but I forgot to do that before capturing all the game footage I needed. Still, even on limited hardware, it's usually possible to run this game at 640 by 480 resolution with a decent frame rate, though it does still have some timing issues if the frame rate gets too high, just like the first Descent game did with its homing missiles, and it really is incredibly challenging, even on skill settings as low as Trainee. Really, this game was designed specifically for the fans of the first Descent game, so chances are if you already played Descent on a regular basis when it was still new, you probably already have Descent 2. If not, then it's definitely worth getting since it has so much more content and is much better polished than the first Descent game. This is also a good game to pick up if you enjoy games that take full advantage of joysticks, or games that are just brutally difficult. However, if you didn't like the first Descent game for whatever reason, then you're probably not going to like this one either. And if you've never played a Descent game before, then I recommend trying the first one before this one, even though you buy both of them together nowadays, because the first one serves as a good introduction to the series and is the best way to gauge if you'll enjoy the second or even the third game. Setting this game up in DOSBox is easy enough, just set a really high fixed cycles count. There's unfortunately no magic combination that will make everything work flawlessly, and the max setting will just cause timing issues and make homing weapons really hard to dodge. And no, patching up to version 1.2 won't solve this problem. I recommend a fixed cycles count of 120,000 if your system can handle it. If not, then you might as well just set it to max and hope for the best. Also, if you're using a joystick, make sure you set the joystick type to CH flight stick mode and turn off button wrap so that you can use DOSBox's key mapper to map buttons beyond the fourth one to keyboard controls. I also highly recommend mapping your hat to the keyboard's sliding keys as opposed to using the game's internal hat support. Lastly, if you're playing from the actual CD like I am, you'll probably want to create a QBin CD image file pair and image mount the Q file into DOSBox in order to get the CD audio working properly and to cut down on the loading times. I feel I should mention too that beyond playing the game straight in DOSBox, you also have the option of going with one of the source ports that are out there, the two best choices being D2X XL and D2X Rebirth. D2X Rebirth is far easier to configure and play than D2X XL, not to mention it tends to run better overall, but if you want lots of additional features over the original game, D2X XL is the better choice. I'll have links for both ports below this video on my website, but I should probably warn you guys too that getting the CD audio music from the GOG release working in these ports can be a bit problematic. Thankfully, the GOG release also comes with MP3 soundtracks for the first Descent game, both remastered MIDI tunes and the CD enhanced music from the macOS release. So if you don't mind using Descent 1 music and Descent 2, you could always just do that with the ports, or just put your own music in, or just live with the MIDI tracks from Descent 2. Yeah, the game does have a handful of MIDI tunes present, but they're nothing special. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Stay tuned for episode 102, where we're going to take a look at a game that is widely considered to be one of the worst games to ever come out of Apogee. If you think you know which game this is, then send your guess to adg@pixelships.com and tune in next Saturday to see for yourself just how much suck this game has.
Self-destruct in T-minus 10, 9,